Welcome to the second episode of the Rational Response Squad. I am one of your hosts, Brian Sapient.
And I am Rook Hawkins.
And I am Yellow number 5.
And we are the Rational Response Squad. Over the last couple days, we've gotten a lot of letters. Thank you for all your support, guys. We really look forward to being able to bring you this project for quite a long time. Additionally, in a few minutes, we're going to have Dennis McKinsey on, author of Biblical Errancy. Rook has been an important part of Dennis McKinsey's Biblical Errancy panel for the last few years, and he's also now Dennis McKinsey's publicist. Dennis will be joining us on freethoughtmedia.com hopefully very soon with a new show.
Dennis is the author of 2 books, the Encyclopedia of Biblical Errancy, and also the Debater's Guidebook to Biblical Errancy. So he's been doing this now for about 30 years, and he's got a lot to say. And, you know, if you've been doing it for 30 years, I guess you'd have a lot to say, too. So,
See, I'd run out of things to say after 30 years.
well, I guess he's got, 5 volumes of notebooks lying around. I don't think he can possibly run out of things to say about the Bible. So, there's so much wrong with it. And I think he's going to be very happy to explain to us exactly what's wrong with it and answer some of the questions that some of our Christian friends have written in.
We like to do a mailbag in every show. It's not always going to happen, but you got a letter there, I believe, about Jesus existing.
Yes, actually, we have a contest challenge out right now for somebody who can bring me contemporary, unbiased evidence of Jesus' existence, okay? We're offering $500.
$500 I'm offering. I mean, I'd offer a lot more, but I think that if anybody saw like 5,000, 10,000, which I have, I'd be totally willing to put up.
Oh my gosh, yeah, for evidence of a Jesus.
Yeah, because if somebody could do that, I would just resell it for, a quarter of $1 million or something like that.
Yeah,
so,
definitely. So,
I mean, I'd give them, really whatever they want if they had it.
Right.
If they really wanted to come forward with the evidence and give me the rights to the evidence. You have a $250,000 for all. I'd come up with the funds.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
But
So,
it's $500 to make it seem like a legit offer, which it is.
And it is a legit offer. It's not like Ken Hovine's prize or anything like that.
Oh, yeah.
It's a winnable prize, and it's money on a table for any of you believers out there to come and claim.
Yeah, you have to just give us contemporary evidence that Jesus existed, which I don't know if you guys realize it's never been done.
Never been done. Nope. I'm still waiting on it. No evidence so far.
So what was the evidence that you got here? You got some contemporary evidence here.
Oh, contemporary. Watch out. All right. So John writes me, he gives me a couple of names here. He says, Thallus, published chronological work on the Trojan War, tries to explain away the darkness at Jesus' death as an eclipse of the sun. Basically, all right, Thallus never mentions Jesus at all. In fact, Thallus doesn't mention anything about Jesus. Thallus is actually talking about an eclipse of the sun, like 4 or 5 years before Jesus was supposedly died. So not only is this irrelevant because he wrote so late, he's not a contemporary, okay? But he doesn't even talk about anything that has to do with Jesus. And what Christians like about this is they try to tie it in somehow with the great darkness that encompassed the land, the entire world, at the end of the gospel accounts when Jesus died. The problem is this just does not happen. Nowhere is this mentioned. As a matter of fact, Pliny the Younger and a couple others, historians at the time, documented all sorts of phenomenon that they considered in their lifetime. And nothing is ever mentioned about the time when Jesus supposedly died. So, this is obviously a false, doesn't fit the criteria at all. It actually brings up Pelagian, okay? Now, I asked for contemporary evidence, didn't I? Didn't I ask for contemporary evidence?
Pelagian's contemporary, though.
Oh, yeah. 140 CE. He wrote 14 books. I'm sorry.
Jesus lived to be 140. Everybody knows he died in 141.
Yeah, apparently this guy can't do math. So, John thinks that Pelagian's contemporary. The problem with Pelagian is, again, he talks about something that happened. Basically, he's referring to Thallus. Okay, but the problem is that there's a actual mistranslation. Okay, when he talks about Thallus knowing something about paternal darkness. All right, there's actually a person. His actual real name was Hallis, not Thallus. All right, Hallis. It's like one big confusion. Christians try to use one thing to prove the other, but the other thing doesn't talk about anything related to the subject. So, again, Pelagian trying to prove Jesus existed at 140 CE, okay, that's like...
It's not contemporary.
Not contemporary, that's like 110 years.
What is he talking about? I'm reading the article over your shoulder here. What is he talking about? He alluded to an earthquake that accompanied the crucifixion?
Yeah, never was documented.
I mean, what the hell? How would that not even be in the Bible?
No, that actually is in the Bible.
Oh, that's in the Bible?
The Gospels account for an earthquake and the darkness
at the crucifixion.
Yes.
And everybody in the entire world just missed that?
That's the problem. Even if it happened in a small area in Galilee, okay,
it would have been documented.
Somebody would have said, Josephus would have commented on that.
Right.
Now, not a mention of this anywhere in any of the ancient texts of the time. So this is obviously false. Throw this out the window. Okay.
All right, next.
Maribar Serapon. A letter to his son. Okay. What advantage did the Jews gain from executing their wise king? That's the only excerpt they can bring me. Is this little passage? This is also not contemporary, by the way. This is written like a couple decades after Jesus supposedly died, and it was not even referring to Jesus.
Yeah, it doesn't say anything about Jesus.
Nothing.
The wise king. I mean, that could be anything.
Further speculating onto what this could possibly mean, Christians will go out of their way to try to fit things into sentences from other people just to make their point.
Next.
Yep.
Tacitus. Oh my gosh. Why people would ever use Tacitus, I don't know. I should stab people in the eye every time I try to use this one.
Yeah, that's not very rational.
It's not rational, but it's funny. The only thing... First of all, this is a completely irrational quote here, because not only is this not the correct translation of Tacitus, all right, because it clearly says here, this was the sect known as Christians. Sorry, that passage does not exist in Tacitus, okay? He's referring to Christians, okay, in the actual Tacitus pamphlets. Christians, not Christians, okay, but Christians. Christian
seems like he's getting everything like a couple letters off.
Right. You'll notice here he says the founder's name was Christus. Okay.
Yeah.
Now Christus and Crestus were really one and the same person. If you ever heard of Suetonius is also used to prove Christ's existence. Again, Tacitus is not a contemporary either. Even if Tacitus is talking about Christians here, no one's discounting that Christians existed. Tacitus never witnessed Jesus. Tacitus was not alive when Jesus was alive, nor was he alive when Jesus died. So, sorry, that's out the window too. And no mention of Christ there.
Well, I can already see this one from right here, Rook. Let me do this one. Lucian of Samosata. Is that how you pronounce it? You probably don't know.
Samosata.
Lived in the 2nd century. Christ keeps getting older and older.
I know, man. Like, if he's contemporary, man, they're really pushing it.
The quote came out of the 2nd century AD in Syria.
By a man, no less, who was mocking and satiring Christians for their false belief and a false prophet. If Christians want to use Lucian to prove Jesus' existence,
you might as well use me.
They might as well use you. All right? Oh, he mentioned Christ. That means that Jesus must have existed. Nope, sorry. Wrong answer.
And,
why don't you try again?
And about 150 years too late, too.
A little bit. And the thing is, Lucian actually wrote in the mid-2nd century, I believe. Yeah. So, sorry.
Please, in the future, when you guys submit evidence, look up the definition of the word contemporary. Yeah,
look up the definition of evidence.
Yeah. This guy obviously doesn't know what contemporary means, or he wouldn't have submitted the quote-unquote evidence that he did.
Listen, folks, just so that you know, we're very rational.
Sin of pride.
It is possible that we'll make a mistake here or there, and I want you to do me a favor. I want you to never blindly trust anything that we say.
Oh, no, don't. Please don't.
Please cross-reference everything that we will, espouse to you in our show. And you should never blindly believe anybody. In fact, that would be extremely irrational.
Right. Yes, it would. That should be another rational precept.
So, to blindly believe anybody?
Blindly believe anything?
Well, maybe we'll add it to the list.
The list may grow.
Yeah.
Well,
it will.
Yeah. It's guaranteed to.
This is a perfect time. We'll pull up Dennis McKinsey.
Oh, yes.
Get him on the phone, and we'll spend at least an hour listening to him.
Yeah. He's got a lot to say.
Right. And if you think Rook knows the Bible, wait till you hear Dennis.
This is my mentor.
With us on the line, we are joined by Dennis McKinsey. Dennis, how are you?
Okay, fine. How are you?
Hey, we're doing good.
Hey, Dennis.
Dennis, tell us a little bit about your book, Biblical Errancy. As I understand, Biblical Errancy was one of the first books of its kind, correct?
That's true. I sort of plowed new waters back in the 1970s. When I got into this biblical criticism and analysis and exposition and so forth back in the 1970s, there was virtually no literature around which I could go to other than Actually, I had to go back to the 1800s to get a book by Robert Ingersoll, and back in the 1700s to get the writings of Thomas Paine. Now, there are a few others, such as Joseph Wheelis and John Remsburg, but there aren't very many writers that were doing what I was doing when I got into this back in the 1970s. But since then, of course, it's really mushroomed, especially through the internet. A lot of people are doing essentially the same thing. But, I might describe how I got into this, if you're interested.
Yeah, actually. Why don't you start from there, Dennis?
All right. Back when I was teaching high school in the 1960s, I wasn't very much interested in the Bible, of course, because several times I tried to read it. I couldn't get through all those begots. It was quite boring. And by the time you get through Genesis, you're pretty well wished out as far as I was concerned. But at any rate, I had a student in class who was a fundamentalist when I was teaching a social studies course, and he tried to convert me. And he brought in this book called Good News in Modern Man. And I went home and read it. It's written in modern English. It's really a paraphrase, not really a translation. And the first thing I noticed were all the contradictions and errors and inconsistencies and accuracies and so forth. So then what I did is I decided, what I'll do is just sit here and read the whole book. And which I did. And I came back to this boy, and I started bringing these up to him, and I started mentioning to the teachers. And they noticed the same thing. They were surprised as I was. Then I let it go for a few years, and then in middle 1970s, I got interested in the Bible again, and I said, what I think I'll do is just sit down and read the entire Bible from cover to cover.
How long did that take you?
It took about 8 or 9 months, because when I not only read it, I took notes. I had a red pen. I was marking it up something fierce. And I'd read something in Deuteronomy and notice that, hey, that contradicts what was said back in Exodus. So I'd make notes in the margins and so forth, and where things were duplicated. And the time I got through the entire book, it was a mass of red. I ran out of 2 red ink pens. And,
did you go through both Testaments or just the New Testament?
Oh, yeah, the entire Bible, Old and New Testament. Of course, 3/4 of the Bible is the Old Testament. And if you go by sheer number of pages. And at any rate, that was in the 1970s. I got through reading it around 76, 77, and I thought, well, I got a lot of contradictions here. And I took notes all the time, not only in the book, but in 5 huge binders. I wrote all my notes in them. Well, I decided what I'd do, and I think I'll just go on the radio. So I started calling up radio stations around the country, and a few guys invited me on. I went on there, and of course, at that time, I was quite timid and restrained and reticent. I was a little bit afraid of how I was, what the reaction would be. I don't.
Well, we can obviously understand that, yeah.
Yeah, I don't look forward to having my, physical things done. So at any rate, I was a little timid on the radio, but I recorded most of my shows, and they're available. Anybody interested in hearing them?
Now, would you have considered yourself an atheist back then, or I mean, what are your actual beliefs at this point?
Well, at that time, I'd say I was an atheist from day one. Although I don't normally discuss the existence of God because it's such a nebulous topic to begin with. You really can't prove the existence any more than prove the non-existence. It's really too much a theological discussion for me. I'm more interested in chapter and verse things that are written down that you can compare one verse with another and to see that there are contradictions and errors and so forth. When you get into this theological material, you're really getting into a lot of speculation and guesswork and things of that sort.
It's basically hypotheticals, and you like dealing with fact. Yeah,
right. And at any rate, after I went on the radio for about 3 or 4 years, I said, well, I need a publication. So in 1982, I started putting out this periodical, Biblical Errancy, and I published it for about 16 years. And I had a lot of people write to me, and they wrote letters, and I critiqued them. They critiqued me. A lot of letters are very favorable to what I was doing and added information to what I had. And that was ended in 1999 because at that time the internet was really coming on the scene. I found out I could talk to a lot more people. So my audience grew, and I was getting so many letters from people sending me emails and so forth about what I'd written before that I simply couldn't handle it all. And so I formed this committee of people to help me out, what I call my panel. About 35 people have jumped in and really helped me answer my letters and commentaries.
It's actually the first time I actually met you, Dennis, was writing into you about the things you've written, and that was around the time you invited me on your panel.
Yeah, right. Yeah, well, you're one of my panel members. I don't know what the audience will know that or not, but you're certainly one of the best, too, I might add, Rook.
Oh, thank you very much.
At any rate, So,
Hey, Dennis,
right,
if you don't mind, what is the link or the address where people can go and find this information, the panel and some of your publications?
you can get my back issues at http://members.aol.com/ckbloom, BLOOMFLD. That's actually a city in New Jersey, Bloomfield. The guy set the site up for me. He lives in Bloomfield.
Okay.
And at that site, you'll find or have access to all 192 of my back issues. And right now, my main thrust is getting my own radio show, as you gentlemen have. And, of course, Reg Finley's helped me out here. And although it's nice to be on people's various programs that people have, I'd rather have my own, and especially in a call-in format.
That's right. Our show's pre-recorded, and by the time this airs, you may already have a show going. But that's you're going to hope to have a show on freethoughtmedia.com within the next month or two here. I understand you bought a new computer, and you're going to take call-ins so that you can debate Christians on the air. Is that correct?
Precisely.
Exactly.
But, I focus primarily, of course, on the fundamentalists. When you get into several reasons I focus on fundamentalism is, one of the reasons is, of course, that they're pretty much of a homogeneous group. Their views don't vary that much. They all take the book literally, and so you know where they are right from the start. And you're dealing with a very sizable number of people, 50 or 60 million. They're the ones that dominate most of the television shows that have to do with religion. And they're also the ones that have a tremendous political influence in this country, having control of the government right now. So, for those reasons, and plus the fact that if you deal with liberals, the people who don't believe in the fundamentalist approach, you start going down a path there. You almost have to take each person individually because they're all going in different directions.
Right.
And I can't debate, 50 million people all having their own theology. I'd rather have one theology that matches 50 million people, if you get what I mean.
Well, that's an interesting point. I've noticed that too. Like, at least I think the fundamentalists are actually being honest. They're taking the Bible literally, word for word. But when you start getting into like the moderate people who take some things as allegory, some things as metaphor, and things like that, right. And what's the difference? What's the filter? Right. What's allegory? What's right. Literal?
And not only that, when you'll have some of them admit certain things are false, and I always say that how do you know what's true once you begin to admit certain things are false?
Right.
The whole structure begins to crumble. On that point, I tend to agree with fundamentalists. If you're going to take the Bible, you better take it as literal, and you better take it as inerrant throughout. Because if you start admitting there's mistakes, well, you're going down a path that's going to lead you over a cliff. Because then the question becomes what's true and what's false, and everybody starts drawing their own lines, and that simply won't work. You're going to have as many Bibles as you got readers.
Dennis, we've had quite a few Christians write to us over the last few days. We compiled some arguments that they have sent to us because they knew that you were going to appear on the show. Rook has some prepared now. And yeah. I thought maybe since we're talking about fundamentalists, that would be a good segue to start maybe addressing some of the arguments that they've sent in to us.
Yeah. You sent me an email with a rather long list here of some people who are addressing the problems on my pamphlets, and I'd like to answer their answers if that's possible.
Yeah.
One of the first questions I always ask is, why are we being punished for Adam's sin? After all, he ate forbidden fruit, we did, and that's his problem, not ours. Especially in light of Deuteronomy 24:16, and this is in their own book. Their own book says the children should not be punished for the sins of their fathers.
Right.
Yet we're being punished for what Adam and Eve did. That makes about as much sense. Of course, most of their theology is ridiculous, but this makes as much sense as if I was sitting home one day watching television, the police came and arrested me, and I said, what am I being arrested for? They said, well, your father out in California just shot and killed somebody.
Right.
And I said, what does that have to do with me? They said, well, he's your father, isn't he? Yeah, well, so what? I mean, Adam did it. He did it. I didn't. And now, one of the favorite comebacks to this is, well, Jesus corrected this later on by dying for our sins on the cross. He got us out of this bind that we're in by Adam's behavior. What they're really saying is, two wrongs make a right. This is a fundamental belief of Christianity. They don't even seem to realize it. We're always taught that two wrongs don't make a right. Well, Christianity teaches exactly the opposite, because you have us being punished for what Adam did. That's unjust. And then later on, Jesus gives us a way out by being punished for what we did. And that's unjust.
Well,
his dying on the cross may be a magnanimous act, but the fact is it has nothing to do with justice. That makes about as much sense as if I shot and killed somebody and they're about to put me in an electric chair, and my dad steps forward and said, I'll sit in the chair for him. Now, that may be a magnanimous gesture on my dad's part, but it has nothing to do with justice, and there's not a court and a judge in the country would accept that sort of arrangement.
Right, and even when you think about the quote unquote sacrifice of Jesus, you gotta wonder, what is this sacrifice really? It's basically God sacrificing himself to change a rule that he made. It never really made any sense to me at all. And
yeah, well, that's another little ditty that they don't seem to realize is a contradiction. I always ask, when Jesus on the cross, he said, "Forgive them, Father, they know not what they do." And I always say, "Well, who's he talking to when he says, 'Forgive them, Father, they know not what they do'?" They say, "Well, he's talking to God." And I said, "Well, wait a minute, I thought he was God." They said, "Well, yeah, he is God." I said, "Wait a minute, yeah, you got God down here talking to God out there somewhere. That's two gods." And you wouldn't believe the mental gyrations they go through to escape from this imbroglio, try to pull in this nonsense about different persons and so forth. That's just so much gobbledygook.
Right.
The fact is, you got two gods. Frankly, I don't care if they got one God, two gods, 3 or 20. It doesn't matter to me. All I'm saying is you can't have them all simultaneously. Now, which one is it? You got one, you have two, you have 3. If you have one, then you can't have God down here talking to God out there somewhere. That's two gods. You got two sources of intelligence communicating with one another.
Yeah,
So,
a lot of them, it's basically the 3 in 1 God, the
Trinity,
Father, Son, Holy
right.
Ghost,
right, right.
and
But that's just like gibberish. There's one church that's honest enough to admit it doesn't make any sense. It's a mystery. Every time they get in one of these situations where they have no way out, it's just a mystery. You just sort of have to believe it.
What church is this?
Catholic Church.
I'm a Catholic apostate myself, and I remember all that from back in the day.
Yeah.
And they are kind of fond of just sort of throwing their hands up in the air.
We don't know. We don't know.
You'll find out when you die.
That's right. Right. Another thing that they have, they always say that no man is perfect except Jesus. And their own book contradicts that, and then a lot of times they'll quote Romans 3:23, for all of sin, and come short. Everybody's a sinner. Romans 3:23. Yet their own book shows that's false, because all they have to do is read Genesis 6:9, which says Adam was perfect, and it says Noah was perfect. Sorry, it says Noah was a just man and perfect in his generations, and in Job 1:1 and 1:8 it says Job was perfect. Now, how could these guys be perfect if all have sinned? That's ridiculous. Another problem is, how could Adam have sinned to begin with if he was created by God? Because everything God does is perfect. He's a perfect being. So where did sin come from?
That's another conundrum.
Now, what they usually pull out is, it's free will. He had free will. I don't care how much free will he had. He can have all that he wants. The fact is, if he sinned, it proves he's not perfect. He's disproved what you're attributing to him.
Right, and I kind of always saw, the Garden of Eden story as basically, God set Adam up. It was entrapment, by any word that you're going to call it. How could Adam actually sin when he didn't really understand what he was doing, or even know that it was wrong? There was no knowledge of good and evil yet. So how could what Adam and Eve did, how could they have committed an evil act when it was, eating the fruit of the tree of knowledge that gave us good and evil to begin with?
To me, it's not just about the eating of the tree of knowledge, but also the fact that God seemed to have wanted sin to enter the world, because he knew, he was all-knowing. He must have known that Adam and Eve would choose to eat the fruit. He put the serpent there, knowing what the serpent would do. It's exactly as Mike said. Adam and Eve were framed for all of humanity. It makes no sense at all.
Yeah, well, as I say, the problem I have is how they sin to begin with. Because by definition, God's perfect, and everything He does is perfect. Everything He creates is perfect. Therefore, they couldn't be sinners. There's a man that runs Ligonier Valley Institute. It's a Christian fundamentalist research organization his name's Sproul. This organization's in Pennsylvania. R.C. Sproul. He wrote a book in which he admits in the book that he doesn't know where evil came from. It's a mystery. He can't solve that one because of just the point I'm making, that you can't have a imperfect being coming from a perfect being.
Right. I have a question for you, Dennis, here. One of the people wrote in, Johan, said, proving the Bible as inaccurate isn't proving much. I'm sure you have a response to that.
Proving the Bible isn't accurate, isn't proving much. That's like saying proving the basis of Christianity is fallacious, isn't proving much. Because the Bible is the foundation of the entire religion. And once you bring the book into question, you've essentially eviscerated the entire religion. Again,
Right.
I go back, I tend to agree it's fundamentalist. You can't start attributing and admitting that the Bible has errors and fallacies and so forth, because you bring into question the Jesus. All of his credentials they rely upon the Bible. All you know about Jesus comes from the Bible. All the sayings and comments of Paul come from the Bible. Original sin out of the Bible. Resurrection story out of the Bible. Once you start tearing the Bible up, where's the religion? John Wesley made a good statement. He's the founder of the Methodist Church. He said, if there's one contradiction in the Bible, there might as well be 1,000.
Right.
It isn't the Word of God.
And the fact is, there
think
are
you're right.
1,000.
Yeah,
More than
1,000 is probably
1,000. Understatement there.
being generous.
Is the what? I didn't hear you.
So we said that saying that there's only 1,000 is probably being generous.
Isn't that the truth? Yeah, my two books pretty well show that the Bible is absolutely a miasma of contradictions, errors, and fallacies. The Bible has more holes in it than backdoor screens. The veritable cornucopia of errors, contradictions, and fallacies. Some other questions. On the list you sent me, I was just noticing some of the questions you have on here. Go back to your original question about God. Now, normally, as I say, I don't get into the discussion of God very much, but I often hear people, and they do write to me about this God business. Well, prove God doesn't exist. Well, the fallacy of that is quite obvious. And this is reason I don't even get into the discussion, because it can easily be blown out of the water right out the gate. And that is, the burden of truth lies on he who alleges.
Exactly.
If somebody comes up to me and says, I don't believe in God, I say, well, that's all right, prove it. They say, well, you disprove it. I say, oh, no, I'm not required to disprove anything. You have to prove it. Until you prove it's true, it's false. Otherwise, this is key. Otherwise, every harebrained, crackpot, screwball, idiotic, moronic idea that you can possibly come up with is valid until somebody disproves it.
Exactly.
So if somebody comes up to me and says, well, I'm the reincarnation of George Washington, I say, oh, no, you're not. He says, oh, prove I'm not. Now, how am I going to prove he's not?
Oh, yeah.
Well, he says, I talked to Jesus this morning at the end of my bed.
Well, did the guy cut down a cherry tree?
Huh?
Did a guy cut down a cherry tree? Maybe he was a reincarnation.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, the fundamental fallacy of mythology in general, and that's what religion basically is mythology. The word religion is nothing but a euphemism for mythology. You got Greek mythology, you got Roman mythology, you got Egyptian mythology, and you got Christian mythology. And the basic assumption of this mythology is that the supernatural exists, and yet they can't provide any evidence of it. And as I say, the burden of proof lies on them. I don't have any problem with believing in God. I don't have any problem with believing in the supernatural. Just give me some evidence. And
Right.
don't tell me to believe it without that.
Yeah,
Because I have no intention of believing it. You know how many crazy screwball ideas are running around in this country right now from every source imaginable? The number is astronomical. And a lot of these people believe these with everything that's in them. They believe it heart and soul. But there's nothing that backs it up because they can't prove it.
right.
So anybody that writes to me and says, well, prove God doesn't exist, I always throw it right back in their face. I say, The burden of proof lies on he who alleges. That's axiomatic to all rational thought. It's not up to me to disprove, it's up to you to prove. And that's where their whole philosophy collapses. They can't do it.
Right.
They can't prove it.
Hey, Dennis, Mike has a question for you here.
Back when I was a Catholic, around 12, 13 years old, you go to CCD class, you learn the Bible, you learn all the stories and things like that. And it happened to be around Christmas time, and we got to talking about the Nativity. So, I got home, decided to read about the Nativity myself. I started with Matthew, and I think it was in Matt 1:1. He basically says that, Jesus Christ was the son of Joseph. Let me find it here. It's Matt 1:1, the book of the generation of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. I'm like, okay. Then it goes begat, 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 begat. You get down to Matt 1:18, and then he says, now the birth of Jesus Christ was on the wise, when his mother Mary was espoused to Joseph. Before they came together, she was found with the child of the Holy Ghost. Now, I was only a 13-year-old kid then, and this just made no sense to me. Like, basically, Matt's saying in 1:1 that Jesus was the son of Joseph, and then 15 lines later, he's telling me that he was born of a virgin. And, this sat with me for a long time, and, I researched it more and more, as I got older, finally willing to admit to myself that I didn't believe in this garbage anymore. You do a little more research, and you find contradictions between Matthew and Luke. Basically, the entire Bible says that Jesus was the son of Joseph. In Matthew and Luke, occasionally God will get Mary pregnant, and Jesus will be virgin born. That's one of the biggest contradictions that I've ever found. What I kind of wanted to ask you about is a lot of Christians will come back to me and try to make the case that Jesus had to be both the descendant of David and virgin born, and so a lot of them will try to make the case that Mary was actually the descendant of David. And, I was hoping that you could talk a bit about that and maybe counters to that argument.
Yeah, well, the first problem with that is the genealogy is attributed to Mary is a slight problem. The most important person, namely Mary, is never mentioned in it. Why would it be Mary's genealogy when the key figure is not even brought into it? And as you mentioned, the fact is that Jesus was... the prophecy originally was that the Messiah, the Christians claim is Jesus, had to be a physical descendant of David.
Right.
In other words, father to son, to son, to son, all the way down to David. Now, if you follow that chain down to Joseph, Joseph is not the physical father of Jesus because it's a virgin birth. Therefore, Jesus is ruled out as the Messiah.
Right.
The genealogy is contradictory to the virgin birth concept. Now, attributing one of those to Mary is worthless because, as I say, she's not only not mentioned in either one, but secondly, there's no other place in the entire Bible where the genealogy of a woman is given. In fact, women are not even, as far as the Bible is concerned, they're totally second and third class citizens. All you have to do is read the writings of Paul to see that a woman's status in the Bible is somewhere between that of a slave and a domestic household servant.
Right.
The Bible is extremely sexist and male chauvinist in tone, just like the Quran.
Right. And, I guess the point is that, women wouldn't have been seen as part of the bloodline back then, as hereditary going through them. It's basically, it's the male line down.
Only.
And it's pretty much most of history, it's been like that, when you're talking about like divine right of kings and things like that.
Sure.
It's always the male line. So it never made much sense to me.
Well, because you're too logical.
Yeah,
maybe that's what it is.
Sometimes
we're rational.
to a fault. Sometimes
that's why we are the Rational Response Squad, after all.
That's right.
Hey, Dennis,
you guys are going to clash with the Bible right off the bat.
Dennis, we have to take a quick commercial break. We'll be right back. Okay.
All right.
So, have you allowed Christ into your life?
Nah, I'm a godless atheist.
You godless heathen! You'll burn in hell. Who's there?
Hold it right there. You're all in violation of an irrational precept. You need to come with me immediately.
An irrational what?
You have the right to remain rational, sir, so please, just stop talking. Book 'em, boys.
Where are you going?
We're heading to www.rationalresponders.com to give this Christian a taste of rational thought.
What about me?
You can come join us and help save the world.
You're listening to the best in free thought media. It's freethoughtmedia.com.
This is Brian 37 from Did I Think That or Say That? Now, I want to tell you about another show on freethoughtmedia.com. It's the Rational Redneck Hour starring Hillbilly Atheist. Now, I'm warning you, if you do not listen to this program, I will force you to smell my dirty socks. That's the Rational Redneck Hour, hosted by Hillbilly Atheist on freethoughtmedia.com.
Join us right now in the chat room at www.rationalresponders.com. If you are listening to our live stream, join us in the chat room at www.rationalresponders.com.
Bowling for Columbine did it to the gun culture. Supersize Me did it to fast food. Now the God who wasn't there does it to religion. Holding modern Christianity up to a bright spotlight, this bold and often hilarious new film asks the questions few dare to ask. Your guide through the world of Christendom is former fundamentalist Brian Fleming, joined by such luminaries as Jesus Seminar Fellow Robert Price, Professor Richard Dawkins, author Sam Harris, and historian Richard Carrier. See the movie the Los Angeles Times calls provocative, to put it mildly. Hold on to your faith. It's in for a bumpy ride. Purchase The God Who Wasn't There at www.rationalresponders.com. Before we come back from commercial break, I want you to hear a couple of phone calls that were made by QX True, who posts over at the Infidel Guy forums. As a result of these phone calls, we've named him an honorary member of the Rational Response Squad. These phone calls are hilarious. They're made to Christian stores to find out whether or not they work on the Sabbath and, of course, break the fourth commandment. Some would argue that biblically the Sabbath is Saturday. Whatever argument you want to make, the Christian stores are still open on Saturday, so it's really a moot point. You know, in addition to that, please keep in mind that our show is available for download from freethoughtmedia.com in individual format, and you can also come to our website, rationalresponders.com, and get all 5 of our first shows for $5. So you'll get a discount if you buy all 5 shows at once. And if you're just jumping on now, we will give you the first show, of course, as well. You'll also be able to download our shows before they're released on internet radio. So without further ado, enjoy the clips.
Thank you for calling Family Christian Store. This is Jenny Ann. How can I help you?
Hi, Jeannie. And what are your hours tonight?
We're open till 8.
All right. And what weekdays are you guys open?
Monday through Saturday, 10 to 8, and Sunday noon to 5.
You guys are open on Sunday?
Afternoon, yeah.
And this is Family Christian Stores?
Uh-huh.
Do you guys have any feelings about the fourth commandment and working on Sunday? Do you know what the fourth commandment is?
Yeah, I do.
Do you guys have like non-Christian employees work on the Sabbath?
I'm not quite sure what you're trying to get at.
Well, no, because I'm just a little surprised that there's a Christian store that is open on the Sabbath. That's all. I'm a little fascinated by that. That's all.
If you want, I can give you a comment card and you can send it off to our corporate office or whatever.
Okay. Well, do you have any kind of feeling about that though?
Well, I do, but it's not my,
Yeah.
I'm not here to judge anybody here to tell them whether they should or shouldn't.
Well, I know, but I would assume that the Ten Commandments are pretty important. I mean, they are commandments. They're not like suggestions or like rules of thumb. Like you should work on Sunday only when you're tired or something like that. But, okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Goodbye.
Thank you for calling Bree, and this is Andrew.
Hi, what are your guys' hours?
We're open until 9.
And what do you...
9 to 9, Monday through Thursday and Saturday.
Oh, okay.
We're open every day.
Really?
Yep.
But not Sunday, though, right?
Sundays we're open noon to 5.
Oh, you guys are?
Yeah.
Wait, this is Brian, right? This isn't like Walmart or...
Berean Christian stores.
Oh, well, don't you guys have any like problem working on? I mean, the whole fourth commandment thing.
Personally, yeah, but a lot of it has to do with the fact that the way they have it situated is we're between services, and
so
for the most part, it's a lot of the pastor or something will be talking about a book, and we do it as a way to allow people to get the book before they forget about it.
Oh, okay. So it's not like it's kind of like a relaxed day. It's not like a work day.
Yeah.
So
we really don't do a lot.
Oh, okay. So you guys like halfway break the fourth commandment, or like?
Yeah, pretty much. Only half.
That's cool. Sweet. All right. Thank you so much.
No problem.
Bye bye.
Halfway break.
Just a little bit.
They just banned the fourth commandment,
Just bend it. I should have said that. That would have been good.
Family Christian Stores, this is Jenny.
Hi, Jenny. What hours are you guys open today?
We're open until 8 tonight.
And what days of the week you guys open?
We're open Monday through Sunday. Weekdays are 10 in the morning to 8 at night, and Sunday is 12 to 5.
Oh, you guys are open on Sunday?
Uh-huh.
And this is a Family Christian Stores?
Yes. Uh-huh.
Really? Wow. Well, do you guys have like non-Christians work on Sundays, or?
Well, no.
Wow. Have you ever read the Bible?
Oh yeah.
Have you flipped around Exodus 20? The Ten Commandments, fourth commandment being
The Sabbath day?
Yeah. Is that do you not work on Sundays? Is it just like?
I do.
Oh.
As far as I know, as long as it's serving God's will, and the store is for serving God and.
Oh. Well.
The message.
Well, I always thought because it said something about 6 days you shall labor, and on the seventh you should rest. This is abomination if you don't do that.
Well, this is kind of like a ministry outreach, just like the church is.
So it's not really work. It's kind of like. So
it's a ministry. It's for orphans and widows.
So would you consider yourself unemployed because of that? Since it's not really work, because it says don't work, right?
Yeah, I guess so.
Wow. Cool. Okay. That's all.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
You have a good night.
You too.
But she has an income from it.
Look at how. I mean, you can feel the urine dripping down their leg.
Listen to Live with the Infidel Guy, the biggest, most successful atheist community on the internet or anywhere. Visit InfidelGuy.com and listen to the regular radio broadcast every Friday night at 8 Eastern. It's radio that rocks your rational mind. Your host, Reginald Findlay, has interviewed doctors Massimo Pegolucci, Jason Gustrich, Michio Kaku, and many more. Plus actors and authors, and even comedians to add to your perspective and insight. Become a gold member. Enjoy over 600 hours of quality free thought programming in the archives. And InfidelGuy.com is more than a powerful radio show. It's a whole community. Come and share experiences with others. Discuss morals, ethics, and more for better understanding of yourself and the world around you. InfidelGuy.com gives you everything you need so you can skillfully and effectively deal with the Christians in your life with knowledge and good humor. Click on InfidelGuy.com right now, and you'll see why it's radio that rocks your rational mind.
Dennis?
Yeah.
Thanks for waiting there, bud.
All right.
What were we talking about?
Dennis was just about to talk about another problem he saw here. So,
I might discuss how I go at this from the point of view of introducing the problems of the Bible. I think one of the important things to do is to keep the problems simple. I notice a lot of people critique the Bible. They make mistakes, several in my opinion. One is they stand a distance and throw rocks at it. They don't really get into the text of the book. And you have to know the Bible to critique the Bible, and you really can't do it. I have a lot of atheists and agnostics who say, I can't stand that book, and I'm not going to read it, and it's just too boring. I say, well, if you're going to critique it, you're going to have to read it.
I agree with you on that 100%, yeah.
You simply can't stand a distance and be detached. Because, first place, the Bible is ideal for that type of thing if you throw rocks at a distance because it's so contradictory. You can pull out, as Thomas Paine said, you can prove anything you want from the Bible. Right. So anything you throw at it, they got something in there to counteract it.
Right.
You've taken the position of A, they got a B, and if you take a position of B, they got an A. So the Bible can handle that with relative ease. So I get in the book. And another thing I think you should always do is start out with simple problems, because the more involved it gets, the more people you're going to lose. So I put out some pamphlets, 2 little pamphlets about, one of them's on Jesus and the other one's on the Bible, and each of them had about 24, 25 questions in which I expose simple problems within the text. I might give a few of them. One is that, you're walking across a college campus, you a lot of times run into these guys peddling the Bible.
Yeah,
and they always say, you gotta, because they are peddling it, they're selling it just like, used car salesman. And,
even worse, they're selling false information, and they're selling ignorance.
Yeah, they're selling bogus merchandise. I put a person coming to my door selling the Bible in the same category as a guy coming to my door selling snake oil. One's as phony as the other, and you have to know, because they're not going to tell you what's wrong with it. They're not the business. Priests and rabbis and ministers aren't the business of telling you what's wrong with the book. They're paid to tell you what's good about it. They'll never give you the negatives. But at any rate, one of the negatives is getting back to the specifics, and I deal with specifics that are technical, because, as I say, they're easier to follow. To get into some of these involved discussions, you're going to lose your audience. People don't know the text that well. And I also try to stay with problems that a 4-year-old could follow. I mean, you don't have to be a biblical scholar to know that you got a problem with the Adam situation, or why are we being punished for what he did, you know what I mean? And you don't have to be a biblical scholar to know the next problem is a problem. You meet these guys on college campuses, and they'll say, we have to have Jesus to be saved. Got to have Jesus. No way around it. Absolute necessity. And I always say, well, if that's true, what do you do about, and they're quoting John 14:6, I am the way, the truth, and the life, no man comes to the Father but by me. And also there's several other verses in John that they quote to back that up. I say, well, what do you do about fetuses that die in the womb? What do you do about people living in the New World before missionaries arrive? What do you do about babies that die? What do you do about somebody that has an IQ of 10 their entire life? There's no way they could ever accept Jesus. That's impossible. They'll try to come up with this nonsense that those people are exonerated or somehow given a pass. And I say, oh, no, don't give that nonsense. The Bible says, and it makes it unmistakably clear, you absolutely have to have Jesus. There are no exceptions. It doesn't say in John 14:6, the following people got to have Jesus. However, due to extenuating circumstances, the following people are exempted from this requirement.
Right.
Namely, babies that die in the womb and things of this sort.
Well,
now, that's a problem they can't get around.
And even
they try.
And even that, it doesn't matter, how good of a person you are or what you do on earth. You could do all this charity work and cure cancer or cure these horrible diseases and care for orphans, but you don't accept Jesus, you go to hell.
Exactly.
But you could be a mass murderer, and before you go to the electric chair or whatnot, you accept Jesus Christ into your heart, and you're saved.
Yeah. According to some Christians out there, Hitler's in heaven right now, while
Anne Frank is burning in hell.
Anne Frank is burning in hell, right? Where's the justice in that? Where's the loving God there? It's just that setting.
Yeah, there are other problems with this whole business. If you accept Jesus and you're saved, what do you have a judgment day for?
Mm-hmm.
That blows that out of the water. You don't have to have the great white throne judgment. What's there to judge? You accept Jesus, you're automatically saved.
Yeah, in my opinion, there really isn't a judgment day, actually, because God is all-knowing. That result is already known. There's no way for him to. There's nothing for him to judge. The answer is predetermined.
If you read the Bible, you see that there actually, if you really took this salvation nonsense seriously, there are 5 different ways to be saved. Some verses you read to say, some verses say, you're saved by works, like many of them by Jesus. Other verses say, no, you're saved by faith. It's no matter what you believe, how you behave doesn't matter. And other verses that you read in the Bible, and this is a very long list, it says, no, you're both wrong. Actually, it's predestined. It's already fixed before you're ever born. That's why Calvinism came into the picture. Then there's another group of verses that say, no, all 3 of you are wrong. Actually, it's by whim. God just more or less looks down, and it's by grace. He just picks who he wants to save. And then you got a 5th group of verses that say, well, you're all incorrect. Actually, everybody's saved. It's what's called universalism. And there are verses in the Bible that back that up. I have chapters in my book on this. There's 5 different methods. And you also got a straight out clash between Paul and Jesus. I often wonder, I sometimes ask the fundamentalists, who's running this religion anyway? Is it Jesus? Who's head honcho, Jesus or Paul?
Right.
Jesus says you're saved by works. Paul says it's by faith. Now, who's in charge here? You can't have both. It's one or the other. And because actually, if you read a key element of Christianity that's especially picked up by Martin Luther, if you're saved by faith, as Paul taught and Luther picked up, if faith is the key element, then really this is not Christianity. This is Paulianity.
Right.
And the text of the fundamental foundation of the thing shifts from one man to the other. It's going to something else that I don't know. I'm throwing a lot at you here. I realize.
That's great.
I don't want to bury you with one thing you'll note when you read the Bible are these contradictions that are so blatant and obvious that nobody in their right mind would argue with them. Like, for instance, and I'm just giving a simple factual contradiction. For instance, if you read 2 Kings 8:26, and I would invite anybody that has a Bible, get out their King James right this minute. Look up 2 Kings 8:26. It says Ahaziah began to rule at age 22. Yet if you go to 2 Chronicles 22:2, it says he was 42. One thing I love about the Bible is the book is horribly repetitious.
Right.
Deuteronomy repeats a lot of Exodus. First and Second Chronicles repeat Samuel and Kings. The Gospels are horribly repetitious. And in all this repeating, I had also the Proverbs is repetitious, and all this repeating, it constantly gets its stories all out of kilter and out of whack and inconsistent. And this is a good example. If you take this one I just mentioned in 2 Kings 8:26. Now,
what would you say to like a lot of Christians will come back with from something like that, and they'll say, well, that's just a translation error, or
did they study Hebrew?
Or like the people who were copying the Bible, they just made a mistake.
Okay, let me finish my point, then I'll answer your question on that. Because the Bible has these blatant, obvious contradictions, I'm talking about the King James Version. You have new versions of the Bible coming on the market these days. In the 19th century, put out a lot of them. The ASV, especially the NIV, NASB, Revised Standard, all these new versions. And one of them in particular shows very well, very easily, how the Bible is a political book. What they decided to do, especially these conservative, these right-wing scholars, decided, there's no sense in arguing the point that these are contradictions. They clearly are. Give up the ghost. What we'll do is we'll write a new book, and we'll write them out. And so that's what they've done. If you read the NIV, and I noticed this paper you sent me, some guy says here, my Bible says 22 for both of these. He's right, it does. NIV says 22 for both because they wrote the text so the contradiction's gone. Now that's blatant deception and lying as far as I'm concerned.
Right.
Because the King James Version is a much more accurate version, much more reliable. And the reason is because the King James people didn't have people like me back then bothering them. So they could be more honest, you know what I mean?
Right.
But nowadays, more and more people come along down the pike like me. They think, geez, this gets to be a real problem. We're going to have to rewrite the text to get rid of these difficulties. Now, and I have an entire section of my book that talks about where versions differ, and it covers all these different points that I can bring out where they've rewritten the text to get out of various problems. Now, to answer your specific question, what you're really saying is, and what I hear from people is, well, you have to go back to the original Greek and Hebrew.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
That's the correct version, and these versions of the day are, simply in error because somebody copied something wrong. There's several problems with that. First is, there is no original Greek and Hebrew to go back to. There are no original writings of the Bible. If you go into a bookstore and you say, I want a copy of the Bible, and they say, good, we got the NIV over here, the New International Version, the King James Version. You say, wait a minute, I don't want a version of anything. I want a copy of the Bible.
Yeah, the autography doesn't exist.
They can't give you that. All they can give you is a book written by a group of scholars, although in some cases, like Lamsa, written by one scholar. They give you a book written by a group of scholars who went back and examined some manuscripts, of which there are thousands, which purport to be accurate representations of the original, which no longer exists. Now, these copies conflict with one another constantly. And so when you say, well, you have to go back to the original, there is no original to go back to. Secondly, how do you know which copy is an accurate copy of the original?
Even Josh
That's
McDowell.
strictly a call made by the various scholars. Because these scholars argue, you could be the world's greatest Greek and Hebrew scholar, and you would still find people disagreeing with you because these manuscripts clash.
Right, even
that doesn't solve the problem at all. Yeah, hello?
Yeah, I was saying, even when sorry, even when reading Josh McDowell or leading apologetics, they always say they also agree to the fact that the original manuscripts don't exist, the Apocrypha doesn't exist, and
right.
they try to get out of it by saying, oh, well, you should believe it anyway and have faith that the original manuscripts did have it right. But what's the point in that? I mean, you're basically assuming there, and you're not.
Yeah, you don't know the contradiction wasn't the. How do you know these copies of the originals are inaccurate copies? You have no evidence of that. They're just saying that. I mean, they could be very accurate copies of the originals, assuming the originals really existed, and the contradiction was there.
Right.
So they're making an assumption for which they have no evidence.
Argument from ignorance.
An argument from, yeah, exactly. And now, if you read, and not only that, what I do is I don't have one version of the Bible, the King James. I have quite a few. And if you read the ASV, American Standard Version, the Jerusalem Bible, the New English Bible, the Masoretic text, and so forth, in most cases you'll find that they're all saying the same thing. Now, if all these versions are agreeing, and then somebody comes up and says to me, well, you have to go back to the Greek. These people did go back to the writings that purport to be accurate copies of the original, and they all agree on what it says. Now, you're telling me they're wrong.
Right.
And one of the problems I always have with people is they will, especially a lot of times these are amateurs doing this, they come up to me and say, well, the Bible is a book that when it has mistakes in it, and they'll start arguing particular verses should have been rewritten. It should have been written another way. In other words, I could give some examples that one doesn't come to my mind right now, but I know 2 Timothy 3:16 does. What that should say about the validity of the Bible. And they'll say, well, it should say this, whereas the version I have says that. And my immediate comeback is, what are your credentials in Greek and Hebrew? How much Greek and Hebrew do you know?
Exactly,
How long have you studied it? How many courses have you taught in Greek and Hebrew? Because you must think you're pretty good at Greek and Hebrew, because you're telling me a panel of Greek and Hebrew experts don't know how to translate.
Exactly.
And I'm taking these guys at their word that they do know what they're talking about, and they know more about it than you do. And this is what they say is the best translation. Let me give you a good example, one that definitely comes to mind. In fact, I got it almost in section in my book on this one. And I'm going back to something that's really important here, the 10 Commandments. One of them is, thou shalt not kill. Boy, that one's caused a lot of trouble. Thou shalt not kill. Now,
Christians seem
if
to
you
like
take that literally,
with that one.
That means you can't be in the army. You better not have a gun. And the police can't do any killing. It doesn't say there's extenuating circumstances. It says you don't kill, period.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I noticed you said that the word is in question because it might be murder as opposed to kill.
Yeah, exactly. What they do is they change the word to murder in many of the new translations. Now, there's a big difference between murdering and killing. You know, all murders are killings, but not all killings are murders.
Right.
It's like saying, all dogs are animals, and not all animals are dogs. And so, by narrowing it down to just murder, they changed the text. They're rewriting the script. They're telling me that the guys that wrote the people who wrote the King James don't know Greek and Hebrew very well. In this case, they don't know either because it's changing both the Old and New Testament.
Right. And I guess when you think about it, they're changing. If they believe in God, they're changing God's words.
Exactly.
Know.
And isn't God supposed to be condemning everyone to 52 plagues when that happens? So why do they really want to do that?
Yeah, well, the Bible specifically says you shall not add to or subtract from the text of Scripture.
Exactly.
It prohibits that. The canon is closed. Nobody's permitted to. You can't add to it. You can't subtract from it. You can't rewrite what's in it.
Well, if there's a hell, those guys will be burning in it for sure.
Pretty much. Yep.
Incidentally, since I brought up the King James, brought up the 10 Commandments, there's another one that really I find interesting is that most Christians violate one of them regularly, every week, in fact. What is the fourth commandment? Honor the Sabbath.
Yeah.
I always ask, what are you doing to honor the Sabbath? They say, well, I go to church.
That's getting in
When
their
you
car.
go to church, they say, well, I go on Sunday. Sunday?
That's
Sunday's not the Sabbath. The Saturday is. God rested on the seventh day, not the first, my friend.
Exactly, yeah.
And so in effect, what they're doing is they are avoiding or ignoring the Ten Commandments, or at least one of them, on a regular basis. They're violating one of the Ten Commandments. And that applies to virtually all of Christianity, except for a few churches.
I see them
Seventh-day Adventists.
I see them violating the "Thou shalt not have any graven images" quite an awful bit.
Oh
too.
yeah,
yeah,
Catholics are big on that one.
Oh, yeah.
Right. That's,
Hey, Jesus himself even violates commandments constantly. Working on the Sabbath by stealing and picking corn. There's two commandments right there he committed, and fraudulent, bad actions against. And he also lied a couple of times. And
a couple.
Yeah, more. Okay, so I downplayed it a little bit because I was trying to keep things simple. But if you want to get technical, yeah, he lied a whole junkload of times.
Got it. A good example is one of the prophecy in Matthew 12:40 says, of course, Jonas was 3 days and 2 nights in the whale's belly. So shall the Son of Man be 3 days and 2 nights in the heart of the earth. The prophecy is that Jesus was supposed to, die and be buried and stay in the earth 3 days and 2 nights, just as Jonah was in the whale 3 days and 3 nights. The fact is, he died sometime on a Friday afternoon, was raised sometime on a Saturday night or Sunday morning, and you can't stretch.
That
Friday
time,
afternoon to Sunday morning to 3 days and 3 nights. I don't care how you do it. Now,
it's either be
one
too
of
short
the
or too
favorite
long.
comebacks on that is, well, any part of the day is a full day, so it's part of Friday, all of Saturday, and part of Sunday. I say, okay, what do you do about 3 nights?
Right, exactly.
And that's a false prophecy. It's blatant and obvious. Another one is that when he says, there be some standing here shall not taste of death until they see the Son of Man coming in the cloud. They all died and they didn't see it coming.
Right.
That was a lie. He said that the orchid seed was the smallest. The mustard seed was the smallest of all seeds. And it's not. It's the orchid seed. It's much smaller. I mean, I can I got an entire 2 chapters on the false. In fact, Jesus has the distinction of being the most inaccurate prophet in the entire Bible. He made more false prophecies than anybody.
I like when he says,
and also making more false statements. I might add, his track record is abysmal.
Oh yeah, he says the cock will crow 3 times and it only crows twice.
Exactly.
He says I won't be going to the wedding, and then he ends up going anyway in Cana.
Right. Yep. He lied to him.
He goes there secretly there.
Come on, guys. He's Jesus. He's allowed to change his mind.
Oh yeah, God can repent. Don't forget that in Genesis, man.
Yep. Yeah, I noticed we got one on this manuscript you sent me here. People critiquing me. One of them says, my question was, how can Numbers 23:19, which says God doesn't repent, be reconciled with Exodus 32:14, where God clearly says He does repent? And this guy's answer is, Exodus 32:14 says He relented, not that He repented. But you know what He did? He went to the NIV.
Exactly.
Remember I said it's a political book? They rewrote the script.
Right.
It doesn't say that to King James. The dishonesty of these people is a sight to behold. Because they're depending on the ignorance of their listeners.
Exactly. They don't expect us to know as much as some of their preachers do, and they know even less than they do. So,
and I always love it when a Christian is surprised that an atheist comes back and quotes the Bible at them, or has actually read the Bible, and it never ceases to
usually
amaze them.
Usually they claim that we stole that off of some site, like we were looking at some site about Bible quotes and we just pulled that one out of a hat or something like that, and not giving us the credit that we actually do read their holy book and don't believe it. They don't understand that or comprehend that.
It's funny you say their holy book, yet I think all 3 of us were believers at one point of what was inside the walls of that book. So
I think Dennis was the only one who was actually an atheist throughout most, if not all of his life, if I'm not correct.
Yeah, I went to the Catholic Church some when I was young. My mom took me to I was about 13, 14, 15, took me every Sunday, but I usually ended up standing outside the building being bored of what was going on inside. And
so I guess you didn't go to Sunday school and get your first Holy Communion?
No. Well, I went to Sunday school about twice. That actually wasn't a Sunday school; it was a Wednesday school.
Yep, CCD.
After I left the public
CCD,
school, I
yeah.
went over to this Catholic church in the basement. I was there about twice, and my dad hit the ceiling because my mom took me there, and that was the end of that.
Right.
And I thank goodness for him. I'll tell you that, because this brainwashing of children is something I totally, completely abhor. When you grab it, if it's indoctrination and brainwashing, pure and simple, you grab them when they're young and they're believing. They trust people who are their relatives and friends and moms and dads. They assume they're telling them the truth.
Right.
Trusting, and they follow this, and then the time they absorbed all this and been thoroughly indoctrinated, they hit the age of 18 and they're trapped and they're caught, most of them, for the rest of their lives. But if you didn't give them this stuff until they were 18,
oh yeah, they never buy it.
Keep it away from them until they're 18 or 19 or 20, and then say, okay, now you can go read the Bible and religion. They're not going to fall for most of this nonsense.
Right.
Right.
Well, and that's another good point. Like invariably, like your religion is the religion of your parents.
Exactly.
It very, very rarely that someone comes to a religion like late in life or switches religion late in life.
Or does it by intellectual means. That is, they read books and decided this is the way to go.
Right.
That's very easily proven. Look where all your Muslims are.
Exactly. Yeah.
If they're in the Arab countries, that's because that's the way they're brought up. Where are your Catholics? Well, they're brought up in Catholic countries. It's father to son on down. It's not people sitting around reading books and coming to the logical conclusion. Well, I've read Christianity, and I've read Islam, I've read Hinduism, and I think I'll pick Confucianism. Very few people do that. It's how they were indoctrinated as they were brought up.
It's very true. It's very true when you say that, because if you think about society and where people live, really where you live is determining where you are going to believe in.
Right. Yeah, it's your environment.
Exactly. And if you think about it, I think it was funny. I was watching Black last night as a comedian, and he was talking about how he went to Italy. And he's like, oh, Jesus is really big there, and he's saying, like, I'm a Jew, and a week there almost made me think he was the real thing, and honestly, if you were born in a country that really only worshipped one particular God or focused on one particular God, you're going to grow up in that sort of, peer pressure.
Sure.
And that's going to basically form you into what kind of religious soldier you're going to be. And it's really a shame. Really is.
Yeah, I really, as I say, I have a intense dislike of taking people to Sunday schools and brainwashing them like that.
Mm-hmm. Do you have children yourself?
Yes.
And I take it you haven't indoctrinated them?
Definitely not. No, I don't indoctrinate them at all along those lines. They know where my views are, and they don't really have much interest in the subject one way or the other.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm certainly not going to indoctrinate them the way that Christians indoctrinate their people. They're always trying to get this Christianity and this Bible prayer and all this readings into the public schools.
Mm-hmm.
And they always say that one of their arguments is, well, you have to have balance in there, and you should be able to pray and things of this sort. And my answer is, well, the first place is I pay taxes, and the schools are financed by me in part, and I didn't pay taxes to finance brainwashing of children into something that I don't believe in, whatever. Right. If you're going to use the schools for that, give my tax money back, and you can have them.
Right.
Another problem is, and I would say this to them, okay, if you want to teach religion in the schools, I got no problem with that. You bring in a fundamentalist and let them teach for an hour, let them teach his spiel, and then you bring somebody in like me, and I get an hour.
You might need two.
Huh?
You might need two.
Yeah, well, I need 100, but I know I wouldn't get it. But I wouldn't have any problem with that at all. But they don't want that. What they want to do is they want to slip their stuff in,
right,
under the guise of having balance, claiming the schools are atheistic and you need to have some religion in there as a counterbalance.
Yeah, somehow secularism is considered the same as devil worshipping.
The schools don't teach about the Bible critically at all. I mean, they don't have people in there talking like me.
Right.
No.
If they had people in there talking like me, I'd say, fine, bring in your fundamentalist preacher, let him preach. But if I want some balance, let's have some real balance. We're not going to have neutrality.
Getting back to the contradictions that you've pointed out before, why is it that the majority of Christians can't see them? Or do the majority of Christians even read the Bible? it seems pretty obvious to me that if you read through the Bible, you're going to find at least one contradiction on your own. And
within the first few pages, you'll find like 10.
Yeah.
Well,
and so are they either not reading it or are they just ignoring it?
They go by what their preachers and their moms and dads tell them.
Mm-hmm.
They don't really get into the book at all. And those who do read the book, instead of reading it like a lawyer going over a contract that's not favorable to his client, that's how you should read it.
Mm-hmm.
They read it like a sponge under a dripping faucet, absorbing everything that falls on them. And that's not the way to do it. If you're going to sit there and absorb whatever comes off the page is pure truth and not going to look at it with any kind of a critical eye, you're usually going to fall sway to this nonsense. I mean, the Bible is a preposterous book to stop and think about. Anybody believe a stick will turn into a serpent, a woman will turn into a pillar of salt, an iron axe head will float, a donkey will talk, and people can walk on water. Anybody believe that silly, nonsensical idiocy will believe in anything.
Right.
There's nothing too preposterous. And if people are able to read that and not see that something's wrong with it, I would say they've been thoroughly indoctrinated.
You told me.
Well, or they'll read that and they'll say, well, that's not what really happened. This is just an allegory to teach a moral lesson or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's not fundamentalist position.
Right.
They believe that actually really happened.
Mm-hmm.
See, if you start allegorizing again, you're going down the liberal path. You're going to have as many Bibles you got preachers.
Exactly.
Because what are you going to turn into allegory and what are you going to take literally?
Right. Yeah.
That's one of the problems the literalists have. And this is one of my critiques of them is they claim that Adam and Eve are mythological beings, that they aren't real. It's just an allegory. And I say, no, you can't do that, my friend, because you go to the genealogies in Matthew and Luke, and they trace genealogy back to Adam and Eve.
Some of them go back
and if Adam and Eve are mythological, then Jesus has to be mythological.
Right.
You can't have a real being with mythological ancestors.
Yeah. Well, unless you're like Hercules or something like that. So,
yeah.
And the son of Zeus.
Right. And another problem with the Bible is it's horribly inaccurate as far as science is concerned. It talks about insects having 4 legs.
Mm-hmm.
It talks about the bat being a bird. It lists, in Leviticus, about, I think, 18 birds in a row. And the last one it lists is a bat.
Yeah,
and,
I've read that one.
Everybody knows a bat's not a bird. Everybody knows about anything about ornithology. A bat's a mammal.
Now the one about the insects only having 4 legs, I find it, hard to believe that, how could they just not look at an ant or a grasshopper back then?
Sure.
And, so how did that even get into the book in the first place?
Right.
Were they drunk while they were writing this, or
Yep.
It just baffles me. But yet it's in there, and apparently, and nobody noticed until you started your work, 2 or 3 decades ago. And
right. So I feel sort of proud of sort of being a pioneer in this.
Yeah, you should feel proud about it.
When I started back in the 70s, I looked around the United States looking for anybody that was doing essentially what I'm doing. There wasn't anybody. The only person that had any notoriety was Madeleine Murray O'Hare. Of course, she's an atheist, and she didn't get into the Bible hardly at all, and she and I didn't get along very well at all either. We had a few clashes. And so one of her letters, it's in my 16th issue of my publication, she wrote back to me. She says, we don't discuss the Bible. It's I can't remember the exact terms, it's the meanderings of a lost mind or something, and it's a waste of time and effort.
Is that an example of a clash there? Was there anything more to it than that?
Well, yes, there was. I don't know whether you want to get into that.
No, I do. I want to hear the juicy stuff. That's compelling radio right there.
Yes, Sapient likes controversy.
Well, I may say this about Madeleine O'Hare. As I say, I've had contact with her, and personal even. And she did fine work. She broke the ice back in the 60s and getting prayer out of schools, where it definitely does not belong in the schools. It doesn't belong anywhere, frankly, because it's superstition. But she did good work there, and she also fought a lot of good court battles, and she helped a lot of organizations. But my problem with her was just her personality was definitely not my cup of tea.
Yeah, she was definitely a mean person. There's no doubt about
a
that.
bit abrasive,
I went
put it mildly.
my wife and I went down to Texas to visit her and her supporters there. And when we got there to her building where she had her headquarters, and we went in, and there was nobody there but a guy who was everything one of her aides, and he offered to take us around. And so we went to her library. She had a very extensive library there. And my wife and I were just walking around looking at books and so forth. And while we were there, Madeline came back with her entourage. Now this was after, before this, she and I had a clash in my publication, so she didn't like me to begin with. At any rate, she found me in the library and just hit the ceiling and chewed out this guy that let me walk around in there looking at books. We weren't doing anything; we were just, meandering. And I thought that was totally uncalled for.
That does seem a bit odd.
Yeah, it's a little bit. What, you're reading books? Get out of my house.
Yeah, get out of my house type of thing. If I was Jerry Falwell wanting to put up somebody to represent atheism, I'd pick her because she.
Well, it just goes to show you, Dennis. That,
and I would pick someone like Falwell or Robertson to represent the other side. So
it just goes to show you that this is evidence right here that to be an atheist does not mean you have something in common with another atheist. Just a lack of belief in a God, and that's beautiful.
And you don't have the same personality.
Exactly, that's part of it. Yep.
Yeah, because I think the lady they have in charge of American Atheists now is far more sensible and much more amenable to conversations and so forth.
Actually, I have that letter from Madeline Murillo here up right now. I'm looking at it, and she was pretty.
This is a letter from Madeline to Dennis?
From Madeline to Dennis. Says, Dennis McKinsey, thank you for your inquiry. American Atheists feels it is reactionary to do battle on the grounds of the religious. The battle needs to be thrown into the trash. Your continuing jousting with the segments thereof gives authentication to that with which you do joust. One does not argue with one's nightmares. The exercise is, as the French say, inutile. The convention in Kentucky has no interest in this at all. Therefore, we will not authorize you to set up a booth to publicize and distribute copies of your publication which drags atheists back to the Bible for no good reason.
Well, I mean, that's to me, that sounds sort of like a lot of like the scientists today and things like that refusing to, talk about or even, debate, the creationists. And I think, I've always been sort of the opinion ignoring it doesn't make it go away. And you pretty much have to meet the other side on their terms.
Right. This is what they use.
Right. And meet them on their terms and go from there. To ignore it and to not talk about it. I don't think that's helpful.
I mean, she just straight out says here, you will not be permitted to use the facilities for which we have paid. You will not distribute your literature or give it a place in our book stands. There is no personal or other animosity in this position paid, which we take with respect to your biblical errancy. There are tactics one uses in battle, and we decline to use these tactics. I mean, she's pretty much telling you right there that I'm sorry, you're not going to be here.
Right. I sent a letter originally asking to set up a booth at our atheist convention.
Right.
She basically told me to take a walk.
Right.
We get letters like this every day to our mailbox of atheists who tell us that this isn't the way to stop Christianity.
Right.
You need to be respectful of them and stuff.
No,
it's like what does that do? Just walking around saying, "Oh, yeah, let's respect their right to believe in invisible things that have absolutely no evidence that are destroying the world." Let's just walk around respecting that. It just doesn't make it makes no sense.
You're right.
It's a pussy cop out.
Just slap them on the ass and just send them on their way.
Go out there and believe in whatever you want.
Go get them, Tiger. Yeah.
Tell us how you really feel there, guys.
Those sentiments are beginning to irritate me. This deal of don't say anything; it's going to hurt their feelings and so forth.
Right.
No, we're going to tell them up front where they're wrong. That's it.
They don't hold back.
Pardon?
They don't hold back.
Yeah, they don't hold back on attacking us.
Right.
What is it George Bush's dad said? No atheist can be a true American?
Yeah.
Oh, man.
I mean, they make comments like that and they expect us to take a no-holds-barred approach, get real. And not only that, you have to tell them what they don't want to hear. There's no way I can speak to them and make them happy. You're sitting there telling somebody something they believe for 30 years, there's so much nonsense. I think the results are going to be.
We're running out of time here,
right, we're
Dennis.
going to wrap it up.
We've really got to wrap it up, but what are you, about on the third question of 400 that we got sent to you? We're gonna probably need to have you on again soon if you don't get your show up and running.
Yeah,
so.
definitely. You can be a recurring member if you want.
Yeah, well, thank you. Appreciate the invitation. Yeah, I try to get my show running at in fact, I'm going to work on it more tonight.
I think
all this technological stuff is
right.
Well, you should do us a favor and embarrass us and make it so that by the time our show airs, your show is already running.
Right. I think we're on agreement here that we're going to make you an honorary member of the Rational Response Squad.
Oh, that is definitely that is definitely
honorary
the case.
member.
I'm honored.
We are honored.
Yeah, we are honored.
We're the honored ones.
That's a pity we can't get to more data here. I have so much. We did. I think what's the old cliche? We just scratched the surface.
Well, I'm sure you're going to have tons of Christians calling you in, wanting to debate you very soon. So
great.
You'll be able to use all of it.
So anyway, thanks again, Dennis.
Yeah, Dennis.
Thanks for joining us today, and we look forward to speaking to you in the future.
Yeah, thanks. Really enjoyed talking to you, Dennis.
You have a good one, Dennis.
My pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
Anytime.
All right, and that wraps up the second episode of the Rational Response Squad. Thanks a lot to our guest, Dennis McKinsey.
Yeah, a very good friend of mine, and I hope he does well on his own show.
Yep. Looking forward to that.
Yeah.